Back when my daughter was 12, her father and I made the huge mistake of not properly vetting her internet access. We had all the sites you might expect to be blocked by certain providers automatically filtered out, but there were lots of sites that kind of fell through the cracks. That's how Emma managed to get herself into a horrible situation when she was surfing the internet one evening when she came across a website called Omegle. From what she told me, it's a website that randomly pairs people up, who can then chat by either typing or talking to each other with their webcams. I get why meeting new people might be fun, but I also understood that certain bad actors tend to use these kinds of things too. Because one night she came into the living room in a flood of tears. I mean, she was inconsolable. Hadn't cried like that since she was a little girl. Her father and I asked her what the matter was, and it took her quite a while to compose herself enough to tell us. For a good few minutes, she seemed to get just on the verge of being able to say what it was and then just burst into tears all over again. When she finally told us, we understood why. I had expected her to have a falling out with a friend, maybe even broken one of her favorite toys, but when I heard what had happened, our jaws dropped. In her own childish way, she explained that a man had tried to groom her on the internet using this website called Omegle. She told us that she'd been too freaked out to turn the computer on and sat there in horror while this complete pervert did things to himself right there on his bed. Only after a few minutes did she find it in herself to switch the thing off at the wall and come running downstairs to us. We made a huge deal out of it, told her it wasn't her fault, called the police so she could give a description of the guy, anything and everything to make her feel better about what had happened. She seemed down in the dumps for a few days, and she stayed off the computer for almost 2 weeks afterwards. But in the end, she seemed to get over it pretty quickly, and her father and I were definitely happy about that, even if the whole thing definitely left us very concerned. Cut to about 3 months later, and we're taking a trip down to Florida to visit my husband's parents. We make something of a road trip out of it every year, and one of our little rituals when we're on the way down there is to stop at this little roadside Mexican place that does the most amazing tacos. So, we're at our favorite taco place, sitting outside to soak up some sun, and my daughter says she's going to use the bathroom. She gets up, goes inside the restaurant, and leaves my husband and I alone to eat. Less than a minute later, she comes running back out, looking like she's seen a ghost. We ask her what the matter was, and her only response is, "I saw him." From the way she was acting, there was only one him that she could have possibly been talking about. But at first I'm thinking that it can't possibly be the same guy that had done that to her earlier, just so happening to be hanging out at our traditional roadside taco place. I asked her where she'd seen him, and she said he was just sitting at the bar, and that they'd actually exchanged a glance as she was walking by. My husband goes in to check it out and get a measure of the guy because, no offense, but I know Emma was really shaken up about it, and there's no telling if it was just trauma bubbling up after months of repressing it. She might have just been seeing things, I thought. Only now I realize that's just what I wanted it to be, and not the reality of the situation before us. My husband then returns from inside the restaurant looking really stony-faced. He said he didn't like the look of the guy at the bar at all, and that he matched the description our daughter had given the police to a T. After hearing that her father believed that it could really be the same guy, our daughter starts freaking out. I can tell she's trying her best to keep it together, and she did a really great job of it too, but she was controlling her breathing pretty hard, and I could tell she was at a breaking point. She wanted to just get out of there, and we all started walking to the car when my husband pipes up that he needed to go back inside to pay the check. So for not even 3 minutes, my daughter and me were stood by our car alone. And in that time, the pervy guy must have slipped past my husband without him seeing, because the next thing I know, my daughter sobs out and audible, "Oh my God, Mom." I look up, and there he is, staring at my daughter from across the parking lot. You think the guy might just play it cool when a girl's parents were around, and he probably did think that we were alone, having not realized my husband was with us. But there he was, bold as brass, leching over my daughter across that parking lot, and he was smiling too. I get out my phone, showing it to him like, do I need to call the cops here? I think I'd have been angrier if I wasn't so terrified too. I doubted my daughter at first, and I felt terrible for that, I still do. But after seeing the look in that man's eyes when he stared at her, I believed her. I believed it was really him. My wordless threat to call someone didn't even make him flinch. He just carried on staring and smiling. I swear he was about to start walking over to us when I realized my husband reappeared from the taco place and basically chased him off. We were okay in the end, and we called the cops anyway to give a very long-winded statement about what had happened over the past 6 months. They'd said they looked into it, but we don't hold out any hope of them catching the guy. I do still wonder sometimes, though, what that day would have been like if my husband hadn't been around to chase that guy away. He was a predator, plain and simple. I could see it in his eyes. And if he'd have gotten his hands on my daughter and I probably wouldn't be here writing this now. I just wonder, how did he find her? Was it pure coincidence? Or did he go out of his way to stalk her? For a few years there, Omegle and chat roulette were like the best things ever. I know it sounds dumb, but the idea of coming face to face with random internet people absolutely terrified me at first. I wasn't the most confident of people when I was younger, and believe it or not, using stuff like Omegle actually helped me come out of my shell a little and learn how to talk to people. And naturally, like anyone who's spent a lot of time on Omegle, I have a lot of stories detailing some of the weirder encounters I've had on there. I mean, I've had some pretty amazing ones. I met one of my long-term gaming buddies on Omegle, and you'd be surprised at the number of girls who just want to show themselves off, so to speak, every once in a while. But I've also had my share of gross, sad, irritating, and downright scary encounters on Omegle too. And what I'm about to tell you is by far the most disturbing. And it's not some dumb creepypasta either. Every word of this is true. So I just gotten home from this terrible part-time job I was working in 2012, and at the time, my routine was like, get home, sneak one of my stepdad's beers from the garage, and see how palpable the mental illness was on Omegle that afternoon. I was actually having a good run at one point. I had a guy singing that Call Me Maybe song, another dude who did a magic trick, and a handful of pretty girls, and I think one dude was on acid or something. So all in all, I was in a pretty good mood by the time I hit end and knew for what turned out to be the final time of that night. Because when I do, I just see this dude sitting at his desk, staring blankly into the webcam. Immediately this hits me as unusual because most people are looking at their screens to see who you are and not straight up staring into the camera. I said like, "Hey, what's up?" or something. But the dude didn't reply, so I figured that there was just something wrong with his audio. Now I should add that it was usually around this time that I'd just end a chat and start a new one. If the person on the other end seemed too weird or like they wouldn't be much fun, I'd just skip them entirely. So as you can imagine, coupled with all the other weird stuff you're likely to see during an Omegle session, I ended up doing a lot of skipping. But something about this dude really got my attention. At first, when I saw him, he looked like he might be in his early to mid-teens, dark hair and eyes, kind of a baby face with scrawny shoulders. But the more I looked, the older he seemed to be. The guy had crow's feet, deep bags under his eyes. Pretty sure he had flecks of gray at his temples too. Like if he was as young as I thought he was, then he must have had the most brutal paper route in history. So for some reason, at a time I'd normally just ghost him, I said, are you okay, dude? Can you hear me?" He nods. He could hear me, and it hit me that this might be another case of someone browsing Omegle while they're high. It might sound a little mean or whatever, but I figured that I'd just mess with him just a little bit. Maybe see if I could guess what kind of drug he was taking. I start talking real slow to him, trying to make him think time is slowing down or something, but he barely reacts. And it's then that I realize that he hasn't looked at his screen or monitor. The whole time, he was literally just staring at this little lens on his webcam. I break from the play acting and just ask him straight up, "What kind of stuff are you on, dude?" He just shakes his head. So I ask him if he means he isn't on any drugs at all, and to that he nods. Now I'm torn between laughing because of what could have been a blatant lie and kind of freaking out because if he wasn't lying, and that was him sober, that made for one real creepy guy. And then out of nowhere, this guy reaches up towards his mouth like he's about to take out some gum or something. At first, I think he's going to show me some weird root he's been chewing on that made him look all sleepy. I mean, if there is such a thing, I was just kind of speculating. I know people can get some pretty weird South American plants and stuff from shady websites. But then it becomes obvious that he has hold of his own tooth. His front tooth, I think. Like in the grip of his thumb and forefinger. And then he starts to pull. I respond, "Dude, what are you doing?" All calm at first. And then he starts really getting a grip on his tooth, pulling it and twisting it. And I respond, Stop! What are you thinking, man?" This all escalates until I hear like a deep cracking sound coming from this guy's mic. He twists the tooth free from his gum as blood starts to pour out of his mouth, then holds it up to the camera like he's all proud of himself. I am full-on squealing at the computer at this point, stuck between wanting to cover my eyes and turn it off, and not being able to look away because of what this guy is even doing. I asked him in like 100 different ways, "Why did you do that? Was it rotten? Can't you go to the dentist?" He doesn't say a word. He just spends a few more seconds smiling with this gap-toothed grin, mopping at the blood on his chin and holding up the tooth in front of the webcam. Then he disappears and I'm left on the new chat screen, just shell-shocked. Nothing has ever topped that for me in terms of just pure creepiness. Like I have so many unanswered questions about that guy, and each time I think I get close to figuring it out, it just opens me up to 100 other questions. I mean, he would have had to have been on drugs to be able to pull his own tooth out like that. I don't think anyone could stand the sheer agony. And it's also the whole idea that it wasn't his first time doing it. As crazy as it sounds, he seemed to just know what he was doing. That he had to twist it and wrench it. He knew exactly how to grip it. And then the sense of pride at the end, it all just gave me this distinct feeling that he'd done that kind of thing before. I didn't see anything else that ever made me react so strongly, and after that, all the random guys just sort of playing with their junk that you'd see didn't seem to faze me at all. Like as long as there wasn't any tooth pulling, it was just water off the duck's back. So, I guess I have something to thank Mr. Toothpuller for, although saying that it's not something I want to see again. In fact, I hope I never meet Mr. Toothpuller online, or in real life, ever again. One time me and a mate of mine was webcamming with random people on that Omegle site when we came across this one bloke who was actually injecting heroin, wanting to basically show anyone who would watch him how he did it. Apparently we were the first people to actually stick around and talk to him. Most other people closed the chat window as soon as they saw that he had a needle, but I suppose we were just morbidly curious as to how someone actually takes it. Like we'd seen it in films and stuff, but to see it actually happening, that was a different kind of feeling entirely. So as the guy is like getting his hit in a spoon, boiling it up with some kind of citric acid so it melted faster, we ask him why he was choosing to broadcast his drug use online. He says he's not long been out of prison, and that he was about to piss away 18 months of sobriety, so he might as well turn it into a bit of a spectacle and educate some people in the process. I mean, I'd never say I respected a junkie or anything. They can be some really scummy people, but I don't know. The balls of the guy to just broadcast it to anyone who'd watch. I suppose I had a kind of weird respect for that. The guy had his laptop next to him on the couch, and he's doing all his junky stuff on the coffee table in front of me while he's guiding us through the process. And then the time comes when he's got a needle full of this juice stuff and tied his arm off with a belt, and he's about to shoot up. Now, unlike the films, the fella didn't just keel over right away and become totally unresponsive straight away. It was like this slow descent. At first, he was fine, just talking away, sniffing and working his elbow to make the drug circulate faster. And then, like a minute later, his eyelids are drooping. He's going all pale. He's not responding to our questions anymore. Me and my mate were just watching this like, whoa. It was kind of a rush at first, if I'm honest. Like we knew we were watching something that we shouldn't be. We were seeing something forbidden. Eventually he does just sort of pass out, only he's still kind of making noises like he was trying to talk, so I guess he was in kind of like some type of stupor. He's totally silent, leaning back into the couch, head back, and he's breathing fine, but he looks terrible. Only then he does start groaning and kind of wincing a little bit. We ask him if he's all right, but we don't get a response. He just slowly starts sliding onto his side, groaning the whole time. And that's when it hit us. I think he was having an overdose. And by the time he was actually lying on his side on the couch, his breathing sounded terrible. He was making these noises that sounded like snoring and wheezing mixed together, and that's about the time me and my mate started to properly freak out. We start shouting at him over webcam, telling him to wake up, asking him where he lived, but we got nothing. He was totally unconscious. Not just that, he was dying. We couldn't call 999, we had no idea what his name was or where he lived, and that was out of the question. My mate suggested getting his IP address or something, and I had absolutely no idea how I'd go about something like that, but I googled it anyway. And in this mad panic, we tried and failed to find a way to get this guy's IP, slowly realizing that there was just nothing we could do for him. I even found out later that even if we did get his IP, it wouldn't have really helped. It would just show a rough location and not like an exact address. I just remember sitting there, head in hands, listening to this guy's breathing getting weaker and weaker, until I just couldn't listen to it anymore. I just made this sudden decision to simply close the chat window. It was nothing to do with us. We didn't make that bloke do anything. We didn't make him put that stuff in his arm. But even then, closing that chat window just felt like I'd killed him myself. We were this bloke's last lifeline, and I still sort of feel like we just gave up on him too soon. It didn't keep me off Omegle. Like I still went on it from time to time after we saw that. A little because I hoped that we'd see that bloke alive and well, even if he was still using drugs. But I didn't see anything that crazy or scary ever again, and thank God I haven't either. I definitely couldn't handle seeing something like that ever again.